welcome back to Out on That Line podcast. I don't know about you, Alex, but I'm feeling 22.
Well, Geoff, it seems as though that number is tailor-made for that reference, and I'm hoping for a swift death now.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad I could do that for you.
It's really mighty fine of you, Geoff. So we were talking before, and I guess I'm going to kind of get us started on this first part. So after last week, where we covered two albums that were a little more on the obscure side, I guess you could say some people actually reached out to me and were like, I've heard of Shame. Why would you say that I wouldn't know what Shame is? And I'm like, hey, okay, that's
Congratulations.
fine. Good for you, hipster. But we dedicated a whole episode to two lesser-known albums and to exposing our listener base to things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily find on their own. So carrying that over, we decided that that was kind of a fun experiment for us. So carrying that over, we decided we want to do the opening segment on another such act. So do you want to tell me the story behind how you found this and how you picked this?
Yeah. So I follow Laura Jane Grace on Twitter. Really great follow on social media if people don't follow her. Lead singer of Against Me has just recently done her own solo album that we did review on an earlier episode of the show, so you can check that out. But this one, she just tweeted about this album by artist named Lande Hekt, and who's from a band called the Muncie Girls. And she released an album called Going to Hell. And I was just like, well, if Laura Jane Grace thinks this is a good album, then it's worth a listen at least. So I texted it to you and said, let's give this one a shot, see what it's like. And you texted back pretty soon after that and said that you would listen to the first two, thought they were pretty decent. So I was like, well, sounds like good opening segment material to me.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting. It's got some elements of lo-fi. It's got this very distant sound to it that at first I was like, again, Neutral Milk Hotel, I don't know. But I ended up getting more and more into it as it went along. So by the end of the second song, I was like, you know what, this works. And so the other thing I think is kind of cool is I did some research into Lande Hekt's background.
Yeah.
And I guess when she was still doing, I don't know if the Muncie Girls broke up or not, but when she was primarily working through the Muncie Girls, she wrote a song called Jeremy, which was about her relationship with her dad, because apparently he was a world-class asshole. And all of their music is very harsh and very polemic. And it's interesting. I read an article that was they talk about radical politics with the practice of somebody who actually knows what the fuck they're talking about, which is refreshing because I think a lot of people can pay lip service to radical revolution and not really understand what it is they're advocating.
Yeah.
So definitely I want to go back and listen to some Muncie Girls, but that song was all about this really fraught relationship with her dad. And a lot of the animus between them is because she identifies as queer and wasn't really able to lead with that. And for many, many years was closeted. And then started to realize that the punk scene was way more accepting than she initially realized. And don't get me wrong, there's skinhead punks, there's Nazi punks, but punk overall is kind of built on that ethos of don't do what you're told, don't fit yourself into a box.
Yeah.
And I think through playing shows and meeting other musicians, she realized that acceptance was going to come through the genre. The genre was not a barrier to her being herself. And that's what birthed this album.
Yeah. And she certainly, so I read her Spotify bio. I didn't really get too deep into the research. I just listened to the album. But on Spotify, she said about the album, these are my solo songs about queerness, sobriety, displacement, anxiety, and hating Tories. So she is from the UK. And if people aren't familiar with the Tories, they're think of the Trump supporters here in the US. It's very kind of similar ideologies. They're very right wing, very conservative folks. And I certainly feel the same way about that branch of politics. But it's, she definitely is. It's rare to hear an artist go outside of their music and be kind of that outspoken. You don't see it because they want to be able to sell their records. They want to be able to be acceptable to the general public. So they try not to be too much on the edge. It doesn't seem like Lande Hekt cares about that at all. She's going to make the songs. She's going to say the same things that she wants to say. And that's all there is to it. And I throughout the whole album, it's very like stream of consciousness. A lot of times, it definitely has that kind of ambient feel to it, where it almost feels like you're in the room while she's playing it, rather than you're just like listening to the album itself. It definitely is a very well mixed, well produced album, especially for being, I think, like an at home recording, basically. And it was just really interesting to hear, and not something I probably would have ever come across, but it was really nice. It was a good one.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that it's, we're big fans of the concept album. I love that it's a concept album about coming out as queer and accepting your queerness and celebrating your queerness. And it's something we need more of. And hopefully under a Biden presidency, people feel more secure in putting that out there. And I realize she's not American, but I think, not to be Amerocentric, but I think the world feeds off of our vibes, to put it in sort of a hippie basic way. So it was a demoralizing 4 years. And I know we're not supposed to be the political pod, but it was kind of a demoralizing 4 years for people. And I think as Samuel Pepys said back in the Restoration, after repression, pleasure bursts. So I kind of see that album as sort of the tip of the spear there.
Yeah. And hopefully she comes out with more and more. It seems like, certainly was, I think, fairly prolific with the Muncie Girls, and she's not very old, so she's done quite a bit in a short career. So I think it's something definitely to look forward to, more music from her, and especially, the endorsement from Laura Jane Grace. Like, I'll listen to anything that Laura Jane Grace makes, like from way back early Against Me up till now. And I'll give it at least a chance. And to see that she tweeted, because she rarely tweets about other artists and stuff, and she'll even specifically leave the names out of her tweets of other artists. She'll respond if people will say the name, but she generally keeps other people's names out of her mouth, and even with praise for other artists too. And she just posted this. She was like, "This is great. I love this album. You guys should listen to it." So for me, I was like, that's a pretty big endorsement and a worthy one. I think, I think it was definitely very kind of similar in a lot of ways to Stay Alive by Laura Jane Grace. If you kind of musically and how it was produced and everything, it definitely gave me similar vibes, one to the other.
Yeah. And you had 3 songs you said that you in particular wanted to recommend as an entry point.
Yeah. So December, Going to Hell, and In the Darkness are the 3 songs on the album that I thought were the most interesting for me. The whole album was pretty good, but those were the 3, if you need kind of a good slide into the album, nice, easy access in there, those are the 3 I would recommend to start with. And then you want to listen to the whole thing in succession, because like you said, it is a concept album. So just picking 3 songs out, it can be nice, but you get the better, bigger picture if you do listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. And it's not like quite a concept album like Joe's Garage. And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, not even 10 minutes into the podcast, and I got Zappa in already. But
I think he owes us some royalties at this point.
Yeah, the Zappa Trust has got to start paying out soon.
Yeah, we'll go knock on his gravestone. Be like, Frank, give it up.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Lande before we bail?
Nope, just would like to recommend that one to folks. I think it's a good little album.
Yeah, the album is Going to Hell. And speaking of going to hell, hopefully you and I aren't going to hell for all of our many transgressions. But one of those transgressions will not be a lack of content. Yes. Because we have talked, we've made some strategic purchases, and we're going to start producing some video content.
Mm-hmm.
Some premium video content. We got matching equipment, so it'll look the same. We're going through the motions right now of getting everything all set up, figuring out what it's going to take for us to do this. But I personally, one of the things I'm really looking forward to is this concept we have called Singles, which is going to be these really short videos where we can kind of independently expound on things that we found that we're really interested in. For me, it's going to be a lot of focus on like specific songs. I think that lends itself to like a really quick discussion to kind of share our passion and, again, hopefully expose you guys to new music because, we're trying to get this podcast in front of people. Yeah. And in doing so, you kind of have to do your Miley Cyruses and your Megan Thee Stallions and Beyonce's and Bruce Springsteen's. And we're happy to do that. But it's also really satisfying when you can dig into something that maybe people don't have a fully formed opinion of. So I think the video content is going to be a great way for us to share that kind of stuff with you guys.
Yeah. And it's, we've been talking about it for a couple months now. I think once we kind of really got ourselves established with doing weekly episodes of this show, we were like, okay, well, what else can we add? Because we've gotten a really good response so far, but it's, if this is something that we want to really just take as far as we possibly can, we need to hit a lot of avenues here. And video content was one that I think kind of jumped out at us. It was really obvious choice. And, I think with what we want to do with it, especially with the singles, I think is going to be really great because it's going to kind of condense things. So, if you don't have the time to listen to a whole hour and 10-minute podcast episode, necessarily, you might have time to watch, a 1 or 2 minute YouTube video. So we really want to make sure we have just content to meet you guys where you are, wherever that is, whatever kind of content that you're looking for, we want to make sure that we're giving you some of that. It might, we're going to have our special edition episodes continuing with this show. We're going to have the video content. We're going to have our regular episodes every week coming out still. So that schedule is not going to change. But we just want to make sure we're just kind of trying to fire on all cylinders. We've got a lot of things that bounce around in our heads musically and otherwise. So we want to make sure we have avenues to get those out there. So please check out those videos when we start releasing them. They are going to be soon. I think either this week or next when you listen to this podcast. Let us know what you think. Go ahead and follow us on or subscribe to us on YouTube. Make sure you comment on the videos if there's something you have a question about. That'll be another good way to get a hold of us. And we do have some of our episodes already uploaded onto YouTube as well. So we've gotten some comments there already, so people are actually viewing it. We haven't advertised those at all. I think we've just thrown up the YouTube link in our bios on Instagram and Twitter, and that's about it. So those are just getting views regardless. People just finding them on the in the dark places on the internet. People will find anything, I suppose. So I think once we start actually producing video content, not just the audio content moved over there, I think it's going to work out really well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you plugged the YouTube because that whole time, the first time you mentioned it, I was sitting dead red. I was like, we got to find a way to bring up the YouTube. It's really encouraging that people have found it organically and have left comments that run the gamut from really supportive to like maybe some pushback. Like,
yeah,
seems like you guys didn't do enough research. And I'm like, you know what? That's fair. I'm not, I can't completely refute that, and it's not like because I didn't try, but you can always do more. I mean, we could tell you what the members of Hyam had for lunch that day if we really tried, but and I kind of took that as a personal challenge specifically for this episode to do a little more digging than just the songs, to kind of look into the story behind the artist and the story behind the album. So did we say up top what we're doing?
We didn't.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, this is a little keep them in suspense.
Yeah. Everybody's on pins and needles now. You got to tell them what it is.
Baby.
Yeah.
So we decided to finally tackle Mac Miller's posthumous release, Circles. So I can't pretend that I'm like the biggest Mac Miller fan or aficionado. A friend of the pod, Tyler, recommended a while ago that I listen to The Divine Feminine, which was a really interesting album. People are pretty divided on it. A lot of people are like, he's just kind of singing about anatomy in a really intense way. And it sounds good. The production's really good, but I'm not sure that it's as deep as a lot of the Mac Miller stans want it to be. And I suppose there's an argument to be made there, but I do know that listening to The Divine Feminine changed my outlook on Mac Miller, because prior to that, the only experience I had with him was when my sister was obsessed with him. And she used to play this one song from the album Kids, which I believe stands for Kickin' Incredibly Dope Shit. There's this song Knock Knock, and it's just like, if you look in the dictionary under frat rap, you will see the lyrics to that song. It's just this like Asher Roth high energy 1, 2, 3, 4 crazy ass kids knocking at the fucking door, let them in, kind of like stupid douchebag barf. And I was like, hard pass on Mac Miller, thank you. But The Divine Feminine kind of changed that for me. So I became more interested in him. And then he passed away. And I heard that Circles was coming out and hadn't really brought myself to listen to it until you and I were trying to pick a new album to do this week, and I was like, maybe this is the time. I don't know what to expect, so I'm just going to recommend it to Geoff. I know Jeff's not that big into Mac Miller, so it's kind of going to be uncharted territory for both of us.
Yeah, and I don't think, I'm not even sure I'd really ever heard a Mac Miller song, to be totally honest with you. I mean, I'd seen plenty of interviews and stuff with him, so I had no problem with Mac Miller as an artist. I was just probably like you said, the type of music that I figured he was making, it was like probably not going to connect with me. I was really pleasantly surprised by this album, Circles. I think it really, I didn't really give him a lot of credit for being like a super mature, well-rounded person, necessarily. But, after he passed away, and I saw a bunch of interviews that he had done and everything, I was like, well, I probably had this guy pegged a little bit wrong, at least. He definitely liked to party and all that, but I think I just didn't give him credit for as much was there under the surface, probably. And he kind of just put off the vibe of, with all the tattoos and just kind of, being drunk or on drugs all the time, basically. It's just like you get a mental image of a person. It's hard to shake that. But I'm glad I did after he passed away. I still didn't really get into his music that much because I was like, well, the music didn't really change. Like I probably misjudged him as a person, but the music probably didn't change. But I think I'm going to go back and listen to a bunch more and just kind of see if it's something I actually do like, because I really did think that this Circles album was pretty good overall.
His rap is what it is. It's not great. I mean, to be totally frank, he's not a great rapper. He definitely can't sing. He's got that like swollen lip kind of sound, like he just got stung by a bee, or he's just kind of like mumbling. And your mileage may vary with that, but you cannot knock his work ethic. I mean, there's that old saying that talent without working hard doesn't get anywhere, but hard work beats talent that's not working. Whatever the fuck, I fucked it up. You know what I'm saying? You can be the most talented rapper in the world, but Mac Miller, I think, outworked a lot of these guys because from a young age, I mean, he learned how to play the piano, the guitar, and the bass when he was like 6, started rapping when he was 14, and just knew that was the direction he wanted to go, stopped playing sports, and just like put all of his focus into music. And he was prolific. His work ethic and the amount of material he released, like you can never take that away from him. So how good is it? Again, that's subjective. But the guy busted ass. He wasn't just there to collect a paycheck and be attractive. He cared about this, and he put his all into it. So, you have to give him credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw actually, because Larry King passed away as well very recently. So I saw an interview that Mac Miller did with Larry King, and Larry King is a great interviewer. Like as a person, I'm still up in the air of how I really feel about him. I think he was just a rich old white man in a lot of ways. But he was a very good interviewer. There's no doubt about that. And his interview with Mac Miller, I think he was probably the same as me. He had Mac Miller misjudged a little bit, because you could see throughout the interview how he kept, like, he kind of acknowledged the answers that Mac Miller was giving him to some of the questions. And Larry King can sneak in some hardballs on people. Like he's got a way of really kind of getting under someone's skin before they realize, how difficult of a time they're about to have answering this question. They let Larry King in. He's just very disarming like that, I think. But I think Larry King was overall impressed with Mac Miller as a person. And, I think he asked him, one of the questions was something along the lines of, what do you want out of this? Like, what is your success? Like, how successful do you want to become? And Mac Miller was just like, well, I don't know about in terms of like numbers or anything. He says, when I'm done doing this, I hope people still like listening to it, is like the answer that he gave, where he was like, I hope there, it touches people. That's what I care about. He's like, the money and stuff is great, but having success to me is making good music and having people enjoy it. And I thought that was just such a very like a mature answer to that. Cause I mean, he could say there's a lot of rappers like, and there's a lot of bravado obviously that comes with rap and hip hop, and there's a lot of ego, and that's part of it. That's part of the whole thing. It's a very competitive industry. You got to think you're better than the next person if you're going to want to be the best. It makes sense. But to hear him just say like, yeah, he wants to be very good compared to other people, but he worries more about what people think specifically of his music. And it just is a very, I don't know, it's an attitude that you want more people to have, I think.
Definitely, and I think that's reflected thematically all throughout this album, because a lot of what he's exploring on this has to do with this idea of like the dog that caught the car. Now
Mhm.
what? You have the fame, you have the money, and you can always get more, yeah, but is it going to make you happier if you can't enjoy a sunset the way that everybody else enjoys a sunset? I think, his struggles with mental illness, and a lot of people will be like, oh, well, he was never like that out front about it. But I think this album in
Oh
particular
yeah.
kind of gives you that perspective after the fact. I mean, this was a guy that was in a lot of pain. He had a lot of psychic anguish.
Hmm.
And I think you're right. There's a lot of posturing in rap, and he had to be careful of how soft he allowed himself to get. But at the same time, he was confident enough in what he was talking about that he had to get it out some way, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't very on the nose, but it's even just like if he doesn't come out right and say, I am depressed, I am anxious, I don't know what's going on. It's just in the way that he structures a lot of his stuff, where it's just this stream of consciousness. Gotta get up, move into the door. I'm looking for an
Hmm.
open door. I can't find the corner in the circular room. Like, none of which is a direct reference. But I mean, even the concept of circles, the title of the album, it's meant to be a companion piece to the album before, Swimming. He originally intended for it to be a trilogy.
Hmm.
Swimming and Circles would be a companion piece, and then there'd be a third one that was going to be like a hip hop barn burner that was meant to like unite them all thematically.
Yeah.
And that concept of circles, I mean, like I said, find the corner in the round room. A circle, you'll never find the beginning, you'll never find the end, the snake eating its tail.
Yeah.
Just these like literal definitions of insanity. And he was, woke to that. The fact that he was trapped and he would look for these answers, and he would occasionally get these flashes of insight, but then he would second guess himself because he'd be seeing the world for how it was, and one little thing would come and knock him off of that mountaintop, and he would suddenly be like, oh, that was all a lie, I was right all along, and go back to these habits. Promethazine, purple drank, weed, coke. Like,
Hmm.
he was a victim of the same thing that I think made him so creative and talented, was the same thing that ultimately killed him. And I don't think his drug overdose was intention. I mean, most drug overdoses aren't intentional,
Yeah.
but so a lot of people talk about like, oh, he killed himself, and it's like, no, I think he wanted to live and he wanted to find those answers,
Hmm.
but he just kind of looked at the bottom of the wrong baggie, like
Yeah.
it was the wrong way to go about it, but it was all he knew because it kind of quieted the demons and helped him find that peace. I mean, as I've done psychedelics and stuff like that, and you find a lot of answers through that, and
Yeah.
unfortunately it's not for everyone, and it turned out not to be for him, and this is how we got here to talking about a posthumous album, which is really fucking sad, and really sad for his fans. They cannot be objective about his music. That's one thing I've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I understand. Like, I'm never going to be that objective about Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. And, and I think as far as, you could do a lot worse than idolizing someone like Mac Miller too. You know what I mean? It's not as if that's a bad person to pick out as somebody to really look up to. He had his demons. He did. Probably don't want to look up to somebody that's does as many drugs or drinks as much as he did. You know what I mean? It's not. It's those are the things that you probably don't want to emulate. But him as a person was fine. Was great. It's not. I don't think people need to worry about that or feel bad. If they start getting toxic about it, that's a problem. But hopefully they don't. And I think just as with his mental illness, it's like it's hard to say any of that stuff, and he was still pretty young too. It's hard to come to grips because he may not have been fully aware of everything that he had going on. He probably knew that there were some issues, but probably didn't know the extent himself. I think a lot of people take well into their adulthood before they really fully grasp what sort of things are wrong with them, and I say do wrong in air quotes for lack of a better word there, but it's it's hard to have the courage to say this stuff, and especially when you're not totally sure what it is exactly that you're feeling. And I think in his situation where, he's got probably so many people around him, where a lot of them are probably fine people, but there's probably a lot that are only there because he's a star, only there because they think they can get something out of him. So as soon as he feels like he's making progress, with his mental health, maybe with his drug addictions, he comes across somebody, or something or a situation that's, we wouldn't run into as a regular person, but he would probably run into as a celebrity, and a very talented, like famous one at that. And that sort of thing can make you lose faith and be like, well, what am I trying for? And I think that's a theme that he kind of gets back to on this album, where it's that circle that you're talking about. It's like, well, I can just walk around or try to walk away from where I am now, but it's all a circle. I'm going to come back to it anyway. And I think you do that enough times and you think that enough times, and eventually you're going to be stuck there. There's not going to be much you can do to get out of that without something drastic, one way or the other. And, and I think this album gave me a lot of the same vibes as the Steve Earle album that we did, JT, where it, same kind of themes where, his son had his demons and never was able to overcome them. And Mac Miller, same thing. I also get very Kurt Cobain vibes from Mac Miller as well, just prodigiously talented as far as, musicianship, their ability to connect with people, but just maybe didn't want that sort of fame. They want to create and make music, and they love that they have so many fans, but maybe they feel like they don't want the responsibility of that. They don't want to feel like they have to put on a certain face. And I feel like that's a struggle that I know he probably dealt with, but I can't really relate to that. I don't know what that's like. That's got to be something just outrageously difficult to try to navigate.
It is. And to your point about Cobain, I think the difference is Kurt Cobain had an extremely fatalistic view on life and people in general. And again, Mac Miller wanted to live. I mean, there's the, I guess if you want to call it fun, conspiracy theory, like, oh, Courtney Love killed Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
Allegedly, she's very litigious, so you have to throw that in there.
Yeah.
It is a theory, but if you go with the reported cause of death, which is suicide, it does make sense because he was depressed and he had a lot to be depressed about because he got what he ostensibly always wanted, which was the access to the kind of musicians and production that it would take to make the music that he loved, that he heard in his head, and he just had to get out there. So for him, it was less like babes and stuff and more about the art. It's the music, man. It used to be about the music.
Yeah.
Like he genuinely meant that. And then he realized that in this industry, when someone gives you your break and they put you in their venue or they assign you to their label or whatever, you owe. It's something I heard the comedian Patrice O'Neill, another guy gone before his time, talking about. And he was like talking about his own career and how it could have been way bigger, but it wasn't because he just refused to bend the knee to people because he didn't want to owe. He didn't want to always be looking over his shoulder and feeling like his fate was out of his hands. So I think when that got to Kurt Cobain, that got to him and he ended up taking his own life. As with Mac Miller, he really, I think, enjoyed life to the extent that he saw the possibilities and just, it was a total freak accident because he just got down on himself. He felt like you said, he owed a lot to other people and couldn't live up to that. And this idea of like, well, are all your hangers on there because they love you or because they want something from you?
Yeah.
It was probably a healthy mix. It sounds like he had people in his life that did care about him, but he would just perceive them as not, and speaking as someone who's experienced the same sensation, you perceive the way that you feel and act and think to be a burden to these people, and you just project onto them, well, they don't care. They're not giving me the reaction I need in this moment, so they don't care. And it's not true. There are people that care about you, and there were moments, especially as reflected in this album, that he could see that. He could see the horizon, and then unfortunately, he was taken too soon because of his vices. And I would like to say, too, before I yield the floor, we're kind of cooking here, and we're like halfway done. So I'd like to propose mid-episode that we kind of take a different tack to this one than we usually do. Let's talk about the 4 songs that we talked about beforehand as a jumping off point, and not really worry about the rest if they didn't really speak to us that deeply. Because I don't know about you, I'm net positive on the album, and to jump to the very end, I would suggest you guys listen to it. But it wasn't also like as life changing as Phoebe Bridgers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess maybe we could just take a broader approach to this album. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's a good idea because I think with this being like a posthumous album too, I think it might be a little bit unfinished as far as what Mac Miller would consider it. I think, listening to it, it's perfectly well produced. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, there's no weak parts on this album where it's like, oh, he should have done something better with that. It's like you either like it or you don't, but the production is not the issue on the album. I think it's that he probably didn't get a chance to fully expand on everything he wanted to do. Didn't get a chance to fully really tweak it the way he wanted to. So I think some of the parts feel like there was just a little bit something more that needed to be there. And we picked the 4 songs that I think really stood out the most to us, but by no means should you guys consider that anything like a negative on the rest of the album. I think like you said, I'm net positive on the album. There's a couple songs that I was like, they're okay, but none that I was like, I need to skip this one. None that I was like eager to just never listen to again or anything like that. So the first one was one that you brought up. What is the second song on the album called Complicated. So what about this one did you really grabbed you?
It's sort of things we've already covered. So I'll take this as an opportunity to dovetail with the production end of things. But it's a very straightforward message, as you can tell from the title, Complicated. It's him ruminating on like, God damn, why does life have to be so complicated? Would it be less complicated without the money and the responsibilities? I would say no. I mean, as we were starting this recording, I was unloading on you. I was like, fuck, man. Every week I got so much shit to do. Like, I somehow became like the busiest motherfucker in the pandemic. So I think suffering is relative. It doesn't get less complicated. I'm sure the grass is always greener. I'm sure people who, have to squeeze a nickel till the fucking buffalo farts look at Mac Miller and are like, well, it must be nice to have problems like which Maserati to take to the bank. But Mac Miller would look at it and be like, this is all complication. This is all burden. And again, it's difficult to be understood when you're fighting your own battle, and not a lot of people have context for who you are and what you're going through. Because not only are you a celebrity, but you're mentally ill. And you could make the argument like, well, a lot of celebrities, what about Kanye? But like, you get what I'm saying? It's someone that knows they have a problem and is very introspective about it, which this song reflects, but at the same time cannot break out of those patterns.
Yeah. And I don't know if you noticed, and you spoke about the production. That is something on this song that I think absolutely stands out above anything else. The way that, and this is something you'll get if you listen to it with headphones. I don't know how much you'll really notice it unless you have like a very defined speaker setup where there's two distinct speakers from different sides. But the I guess you call it, what is it, stereo panning, where it's not coming through both speakers at once. It's one or the other. With headphones, you really can pick up on that. They do it throughout this whole song, and holy cow, is it good. It is so much fun to listen to just because of the production. I mean, the lyrics are good. I mean, the message is good on this as well. Like, don't get me wrong about that either. But man, oh man, just the song itself, listening to with headphones on, was just a pleasure. Just a joy.
Well, and to give you some background, here's where my research comes in on the production. Right. So he was well into creating the material for this album when he passed away, and his family had access to a couple of the things he was working on. I think on Blue World, someone else, and without it in front of me, I can't say, someone else had it. And then the producer that he was working with, a guy named John Bryan, was the one who kind of shepherded this to completion. And he's an interesting guy. He had some like minor indie notoriety as a performer before he moved into production and film scoring. So he's done a lot of film scores for Paul Thomas Anderson, Charlie Kaufman, David O. Russell.
All the
and like
hits.
Yeah, oh yeah, big time. But he's also been a producer on a lot of projects that I know you and I are very fond of. Frank Ocean's Blonde is one of my favorite albums.
Okay.
He was a producer on that. He's produced Late Registration with Kanye.
Oh, okay.
Lemonade with Beyonce.
Yep.
And perhaps most relevantly to Geoff, Bruce Springsteen, Western Stars.
Oh yeah.
And it's
I
various
didn't
levels.
realize he was the. I didn't realize he did Western Stars. I guess I didn't look into that one enough.
Yeah, and it's not like he's the guy on all of these, but he's involved. And he's a talented dude. I mean, he plays, I got a list here of all the things he does throughout Circles, more than anyone, including Mac Miller, on this album. He contributes at different times guitar, cymbals, vibraphone, synth, keys, drums, bass, piano, Hammond organ, reed organ, and percussion.
Oh, man. So he's a studio rat, basically.
He's a studio rat. Correct,
Yeah.
Geoff.
Okay.
And I think that shines through because he was left with fragments of what Mac Miller left behind. And then it's that J.R.R. Tolkien and his son, right? So Tolkien dies and the Silmarillion's not really finished. So his son comes in and kind of fills in the blanks from the notes. So John Bryan was really working only from conversations he had with Mac Miller about the material. So I think as much as this is a Mac Miller album, I'll go out on a limb and say it's just as much of a John Bryan album.
Yeah.
To
that
give him
makes
his
a lot of
proper
sense
due.
because I don't know. I always talk about on the show, like it's headphone music. And I think people that listen to the show probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You just get a different experience when you have a good set of like noise canceling headphones on. You know, you can really, really hear every layer of what the production is trying to give to you. And on this song, man, oh man, do you get it? And I was immediately was like, okay, this is an album I'll enjoy listening to no matter how good the lyrics are, like how much I end up liking Mac Miller as an artist. Like, I feel like the production is always going to be solid on this one if this guy's involved. And I kind of jumped ahead and clicked through each of the songs to check the credits and everything, and saw he was on, I think, just about every single one of them. I think on the next song, Blue World, it's the Guy Lawrence from Disclosure, which you can absolutely hear. Like, as soon as you listen to the song and then hear that it's part of Disclosure that did it, you're like, okay, that's a Disclosure song with Mac Miller rapping on it. But yeah, complicated. John, I'm gonna have to look into what else he's done too, because I think that's definitely something that I'm like, well, if he's done those artists, I might as well look at what else he's done, because if it's an artist I haven't heard of, I'll probably end up liking it, and maybe we find another album for the pod.
Yeah, and I mean, like, other names I saw were like Fiona Apple, Sky Ferreira. I have a particular weird affinity for A Fine Frenzy because I was in a play in college where like half the soundtrack that the director picked was by A Fine Frenzy.
Yep.
So like, especially the minnow and the trout, like I got super into that song. And so it was like a pleasant surprise to be like, oh, he was involved in music that's like burned into the surface of my brain. How interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That I knew I kept seeing his name all over everything. So I was like, this guy just lives in a studio. He's probably got an apartment above the studio and just like never leaves. Cause it's just, I don't know. You don't get that kind of production unless you like really can do everything. You know, it's hard for anybody to have a full vision like that and have it come out to sound that way, without being able to play absolutely everything exactly how you want it to sound.
Yeah, truly. And then to just put a button on complicated, I guess, it's just a really interesting, like thematically and lyrically, it's an interesting message where he's kind of lost the carefree passion of his youth. You know what I mean? Like, not to be totally up our own asses right now, but we're two guys doing a podcast with ambitions of where it could go and what it could be, but no real concept of what is going to happen. We could get a year into this and you could be like, I got to fold. I got to like start a family and I don't have time for this anymore. Yeah. You know, I could get hit by a bus, or someone could listen to this and be like, it's rough, but I see how we can develop it and we'll take you guys under the wing. Or it's a meteoric rise. The right person hears it and is like, fuck it, put it out to all our, like, you never know. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. You just have a vision and you follow it. And Complicated is kind of a song about how even when there are no guarantees, that's more comforting than getting to the end of the finish line and being like, well, now what? It's less like that hunger and more just constant complication. And again, this concept of you owe.
Yep.
You owe somebody something all the time. So it's less about your journey and what you're chasing after, and more now what you have to pay back to the people that did it for you, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah. And just that question of like, you get there, you get to the mountaintop, and the view's not as good as you thought it was going to be. So you just get that question like, what I do all this for? Now I've put myself in this position that I feel like I'm beholden to all these people. It's like, and I didn't even get out of it what I wanted to. So
Yeah.
it's like I feel like that you're just left with the kind of emptiness a little bit, and it definitely comes through the whole time through this album.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And the next one that you had selected as well, Good News. Now this one is one that I, just about made the cut for me as well. This was a one I thought was a very strong song on this album. And again, the production just really stellar. Like if nothing else on this album, like just listen to it for the musicality and the production of it. And even Mac Miller himself, like the way he doesn't have the greatest voice, he's not the greatest rapper in the world, but he knows exactly how to use it. And it's always appealing the way he does it.
Yeah, it's his little utility belt. He can make it do what he needs it to do, and it's not necessarily going to be pretty, but it's going to get the message across.
Yeah.
And the message in this case really resonated with me, and I feel like every episode I'm just like, let's talk about my struggles with being bipolar. But, the fisherman sees the fisherman across the way, right?
Yep.
And it's just evocative of a sensation I remember, or I know quite well, which is just being stuck in your own head to your own detriment, where there's a whole world outside and you can't enjoy it because you're just sitting there spinning out. Your brain has become a worst case scenario machine and you're paralyzed. You'll just sit in a chair and be like, nope, I can't move until I identify this feeling, what caused it, and what I can do to fix it. And that's not how anxiety works.
Yep.
You have to just acknowledge the feeling and go, okay. Bill Hader put it the best. He's like, my anxiety is a little monkey, and it sits on my shoulder, and I pet him, and I feed him a peanut, and I check in with him, and then I say, go away now, and I move on with my day.
Yep.
Whatever it takes to cope, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
This is an interesting song from the perspective of someone that is so productive, and yet in his off time was completely a prisoner in his own mind. And I especially love this imagery of feeling contained. Like you have these thoughts and emotions and ideas and visions that if you could just open your brain and unleash them onto the world, it would be so much easier rather than trying to channel them into a notebook or, into a recorder. And there's this image he talks about through the lyric, like when you're high, but you're underneath the ceiling. And I just see this balloon that could go as high as it can go until, atmospheric pressure destroys it. But the ceiling is stopping and it's just bumping into the ceiling. It's got so much potential, and there's just this artifice in the way that's keeping it from going anywhere.
Yeah, and he's got another lyric in this one that I think goes right along with that. Why I got to build something beautiful just to go set it on fire. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that, that feeling that he constantly expresses throughout the album, which is like he's worked so hard to get to the point that he's at, and it just doesn't feel like he thinks it should. And I think that I can't imagine what kind of disappointment that is. I can't imagine like what sort of feeling that leaves you with. If you spent, like you said, he learned how to play his first instruments at 6 years old and then started rapping at 14. And how old was he when he passed away?
26.
26. So that, his entire life, like he didn't know any adulthood that he wasn't a very famous rapper. He didn't know any like part of high school basically where he wasn't a rapper, or at least trying to be, and it's just, those are your formative years. And when you've spent nothing but the time, like in those formative years, to get famous and to get good at what you're doing and get to the top of the mountain. And then when you get up there and you don't know anything else and it's not what you expected, like that's got to be such a deflating, empty kind of feeling that I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And it's very interesting in the context of a couple lines that I have written down here. Once again, he didn't kill himself. I don't think, I'm sure to some extent it's crossed all of our minds in dark moments, but I don't think it was something he actively planned on because, again, he professed a zest for life, and it comes through in his music and the fun that he had, where like the good moments were great. It was just those little moments in between that caused all this doubt and gave him a reason to run away. And in pursuit of running away, he came up with a really interesting idea here that unfortunately takes on a very ominous and creepy tone after the fact in the wake of his death. So there's the line, "There's a whole lot more for me waiting on the other side. I'm always wondering if it feels like summer. I know maybe I'm too late. I could make it there some other time. Then I'll finally discover that it ain't that bad. It ain't so bad. Well, it ain't that bad. At least it don't gotta be no more." And there's a lot of ways you can look at something like that. But my interpretation was he knows that whatever's coming next has got to be better than this agony that you feel when you're sitting alone and you feel like shit and your palms are sweating and your heart is racing and you're freaking out and you can't find any peace. Whatever comes next has got to be better than this. And again, as far as I know, the guy didn't want to kill himself, but I hope that in his horrible accidental death, he did find that peace that he talks about here. I hope it is summer there.
Yeah, I hope so too. And it gave me very, again, I mentioned it before, but it gave me very, especially this song and those lines in particular, gave me very similar vibes to JT. And especially like Harlem River Blues on that album, where, I don't think Mac Miller's intention was ever to kill himself. Because I think, from what I've seen, he did have a real like love for life and love for friends and love for his family, and didn't seem like a negative person in the least.
Nope.
And, I think he probably was at a point though, like it seemed like JT was at, before he passed away, where it's like, he wasn't necessarily trying to kill himself, but he wasn't afraid to take the risk that it might happen. It's just, everybody knows, I assume, if you're, doing heroin or doing some harder drugs, that they could not be exactly what you think they are, that it could have a certain, extra dose in there of, like with heroin, it would be like fentanyl or something, that if it's just a little bit stronger than you're used to, or, it's something that you're not, totally accustomed to, that can be too much. And you wonder if that's the case. But, when you do those things, it's like you kind of accept that as an inherent risk with those at this point. And, I got to figure, if you're willing to do those in the first place, you're kind of okay with the risk of what's going to happen if it goes wrong. And I think that sounds like, to me, the point that he was at, where he was like, well, I don't necessarily want to die, but if I do, it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't want to feel this way. And it is what killed him, was a toxic combination of cocaine, alcohol, and fentanyl.
Yeah.
So, I mean, buy the ticket, take the ride. And I don't mean to be glib, but I mean, I would have to imagine his thinking was, at any point, any of this could kill me. You don't know. Yeah. But I'm willing to take that risk because I just don't want to feel bad anymore. And I don't want to hurt anyone. But worst case scenario, I go to sleep and I don't wake up.
Yep. Yeah. It's just too bad. So the next one was one that I actually, sorry, kind of like trying to break out of that. It got a little heavy for me for a second.
We did it again.
I know. And the next one that I had picked out was Hand Me Downs, featuring, I might mispronounce this, but I'm going to try. If one of the listeners out there, or if you know how to pronounce this correctly, just let me know. Features Baro Sura. And it's the only feature on the whole album, which in hip hop is like not a common thing. Like there's not a lot of artists that will do an entire album with 0 features. It's generally a very integral part of hip hop to have the people that you came up with, other people that are in your similar style, like to come on the song with you. It's very rare to have a whole album without it. In this one, I mean, it's a feature, but he's not a rapper. Right. He's a R&B type singer. And he's just there for the chorus and in the outro. And this one, I really, really like this song. I like how Mac Miller performs on this song. I really like that Baro Sura guy. I really like how he does on this one. He's got that really kind of gravelly voice that almost like wraps you up like a little hug. And again, it's a very headphone song. It's if you listen to it in headphones, you get all of these layers. It's just a really beautiful composition.
Yeah, and like you said, Mac Miller had a deep bench. There was no shortage of friends and collaborators he could have pulled from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that he chose this, and I think thematically, I mean, this Barrow guy was part of one of these Korean boy rap groups, which, not to go off on a crazy tangent, but those are nuts. I mean, like, those kids are sent to academies like fucking Hogwarts at a young age and just, like, taught to be the greatest pop star they can be. And it's not like, you know, a couple friends are like, we should start a band. They go to academy and people are just like, you 8 would be a good combination, and we'll call you BTK Killer, and we'll fucking put you guys out there and you'll go multi-platinum. So I think that lifestyle and that line of work within the music industry is rigorous, it's demanding, and it's constricting. I think it's the same thing with American pop. You look at like a Britney Spears or a Miley Cyrus, and you're packaged. It's not really like, what do you got? If you want to really be crass about it, it's like Tim Dillon says, it's like, do you have a fat ass? Like, that's all we care about. We don't care if you can sing. Do you have a fat ass? It's how you can be marketed, and even a modicum of talent can be spun into, like, you know, oh, it's we've created a commodity, and K-pop, I think, I'm not trying to shit on it, but I think it lends itself to that kind of thing. So nice that Mac Miller was able to feature somebody and give them a chance to break out of that mold and out of that lifestyle and just, like, do your own thing.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, the chorus itself is just really good. I mean, I don't know if people are really going to listen to this one, but if you do, like, pay special attention to the chorus and, like, how he sings it. Just the kind, I don't know. It just really, this one got to me just with how it definitely sounds emotional. You know, it definitely feels emotional. I mean, the whole album does, but this one especially, you know, from verse 1, you know, when he ends it, says, I made it, but I hate once I build it, I break it. That might just break me down. It's like he's got this recognition of how kind of broken he is emotionally and mentally, but, you know, he's still got to kind of be behind this wall, you know, because at 26 years old, like, in hip hop, everybody around you, I'm sure, basically is like, oh, you got to be the best. You got to be number one. You got to be the tough guy. You got to be alpha, you know, all this stuff that it's like, you're looked at as less than if you don't fulfill all those things, if you don't check all those boxes. And I don't think he wanted to. He cared about being Mac Miller, and that was it. Like, whatever Mac Miller was, he's like, that's what I want to be. And when you don't feel like that's good enough, you know, anything you create from that point, you're going to hate as well, because it came from something that you don't like. You know, it's like, you too might make a song that I love, but I'm never going to give it a chance because I fucking hate you too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's some of the feeling that Mac Miller would get with the stuff that he created, why he was never that satisfied with it. And you read, you know, about John Bryan, you know, and some of the things he said, like, Mac was always, like, questioning, asking, like, is this good enough? Do you think this is good enough? Like, what else? Like, please add whatever you want to make it better. You know, he never really felt like, I know he knew he was talented, you know, he knew he was good at what he did, but he never felt like what he was doing was good enough. Like, it was up to the level that he thought he should be at, even though it clearly was. I mean, it clearly is very good at what he does, but it's just, I feel like that's what he's trying to kind of convey with this, is like, how am I supposed to like anything that I do if I don't even like me, the person that created it? You know, it's just like a weird way to think about it, but I really get that sense that's what he was dealing with.
And what a crazy thing to make something that's a part of you that other people identify with, and then you grow to resent. Mm-hmm. I mean, that must be a terrible feeling. And it's especially interesting because, like you said, he definitely believed himself. I don't believe that you can get as far as he did in the industry if you are a total self-doubting mess. Mm-hmm. But he had some weird idols that he looked up to outside of rap. Like, apparently one of the most influential albums for him was Plastic Ono Band, which I love. I think, you know, John Lennon's a fucking douchebag. Yeah. Was a douchebag.
Good songwriter, though.
Great songwriter.
Yeah.
And Yoko Ono, like, you know, I think in certain ways she's misunderstood or unfairly maligned, and in some ways it's earned. One thing she's definitely earned is her artistic talent. Mm-hmm. The dolphin noises and shit, fuck off. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. But Plastic Ono Band is a fucking great album, and that is an incredibly high mark to try to hit.
Mm-hmm.
So he puts all that pressure on himself where he's like, I want to be that good. But it's not directly translatable either. But I think this album was kind of him trying to inch in this direction, probably swimming more so than this just because other people finished this for him. But I think he was trying to inch towards that level of artistry that kind of transcended genre, because this is all over the place. It's you know, rap, it's rock, it's lo-fi, it's pop, it's funk. Like, there's a lot going on this album while still being unmistakably Mac Miller. So all of which is to say, the guy's got his calling cards, the guy's got his talent, but you see in a song like Hand-Me-Downs that he just can't believe in any of it. He has major imposter syndrome, which we don't understand, but to him, I'm sure, felt perfectly natural.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, and we all have that sometimes. You know, it's like if you get a job that you don't think you're necessarily that qualified for right off the bat, or you get a promotion or something like that, and you like start working and you don't know everything that you're supposed to know, but you don't really give yourself the credit of being like, well, I'm here for a reason. You know, there must be a reason why, you know, I'm going to sell 1 million of these records, is because people want to hear what I have to say. And it's like, it's hard to give yourself that credit. It's hard to get the perspective that somebody else would have of you if all you can think about is, you know, the fact that you're not satisfied with what you've done and who you are and how you're kind of reacting to the world. You know, and I think he definitely, I think in a lot of ways was his own worst enemy. You know, somebody that talented, you know, that happens all the time where it's like they don't believe it themselves, and the people that do tend to be insufferable. You know, so it's like it's a very small balance beam that you got to try to walk when you're at the level that he was at, where it's like either you hate yourself or you love yourself too much, and people get annoyed by that. And there's a very, very, I think, narrow spot in the middle of those that you could walk, but it's impossible to do. Like, I mean, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head that's like completely and totally likable and is as talented as he was. You know, it's just like, it's a very strange, hard thing to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's for damn sure. So what was this last song that you had on your list?
The last one was Surf, that I thought was a really excellent one. And this one I think was more to do with the fact that it was just so much different than the other songs, you know, so much different than what you would expect out of him. It was certainly more of like a singer-songwriter kind of style to me. The way that it was structured and everything. Like if you took this song off of this album and didn't tell somebody, you know, and they didn't know who Mac Miller was, I don't think they'd ever assume that this guy was a hip hop artist just from listening to this song. You know, I think they'd assume he was much more of like a John Legend type or somebody like that might get into some like R&B hip hop stuff, but is mostly like a singer songwriter. And he's so honest about his mental illness on this album specifically that I have to wonder if it had come out before he passed away, if the response to this would have been a catalyst to him getting better and not falling deeper into the addictions that eventually, you know, he succumbed to. You know, it's maybe not a fair question to ask. You know, I don't know if that's something you can, you know, it almost seems like you're putting it on him for like, if this was going to fix it, why didn't he fix it earlier? You know, it's kind of a tough question to ask, especially when he's not here anymore to answer it. But I do wonder if this album came out with how honest he is about his struggles, would it have changed things for him?
Well, and it's kind of the very question he's asking in this song. He's taking a external view. It's almost like he's dissociating from his own body and his own mind to just try to like honestly evaluate his behavior, his mental state, his relationships, and try to make sense of it all. So I think it's perfectly fair to speculate as to whether or not a warm reception to this, and first of all, it would have been a completely different album had he lived to see it to completion. I think it's fair to speculate, would this have changed anything in anyone's minds, and would it have sent him down a different path? Maybe, maybe not. Because it's like you say, and it's like he says in the song, he can recognize these certain things that he needs to change. And if you can recognize it, why didn't you do it earlier? Well, quite simply, human beings are not made to seek a challenge. I think there's a truck ad that's like, human beings are made to seek challenge. And I'm like, that's horseshit.
No. Path of least resistance, baby.
It's self-preservation. Yeah, path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, no one wants to suffer, and yet you look at Mac Miller and he's on the record as being like, no junk, no soul. He didn't
Yep.
like being sober. It wasn't torturous for him to be high. It was part of his creative process, and he knew that it wasn't necessarily sustainable. So I think in his mind, he had made the folly of thinking you could kind of cycle like steroids,
Yeah.
where he could have these wild binges and then pull back, reset a little bit, get back into it, which just, doesn't work on promethazine and things like purple drink will destroy your body and stuff like that. But it's a guy who was locked into very specific coping mechanisms, so he can recognize these things that he needs to change, but this is not a dig on him, but he was not capable of changing them, specifically because of his illness. It would not allow him to. He says, you just have to get up and go for it. I think it's at the end of Once a Day, maybe the last song on the album, where he talks about, like, I can see the solution. I can see where I need to go. All I have to do is get up and walk towards it. But it is never that simple. And I think Surf is a song that kind of crystallizes that.
Yeah, and it's and it's just such a it's not the last song on the album, like you said, Once a Day is, but it's just such a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
Of a song, and it's just he says, sometimes I get lonely not when I'm alone, but it's more when I'm standing in crowds that I'm feeling the most on my own. And it's just like he's very good at the more emotional he gets, I think the better lyrically he gets as well. Which I think probably has to do with the authenticity behind them. Like maybe he wasn't living the same lifestyle as the Kids album anymore, where drugs became more of a necessity to his lifestyle than they were just something he liked to do. I think it's shows how much he's probably matured a bit, that those lyrics probably weren't easy for him to write, but came out in such an easily digestible way. And it's just, I don't know. It's hard to, looking back at the lyrics and looking back at this and knowing that, this album came out after he passed away. It's like, how much, when these people that were working with him that heard what he was working on, like they had to know something bad was coming too, and it's just like, I always like go further and further down that rabbit hole of like, what could have changed? Like where along the line could anything have stopped this? Have they, maybe he doesn't get the fentanyl that night because he made a different decision earlier, or something like that. Whatever it is, just like all these people probably have, I don't even know him. I never knew him. I didn't even listen to his music really before this. I can't imagine what all the people that really loved him and supported him and spent time with him, what they must have thought hearing songs like this before they were released and before he had passed away. It's like, how do you like hear this and not know that something very serious is going on, and then also know that there's probably nothing you can do to help him, because it doesn't seem like he's that interested right at this moment in getting the help he needs or making the changes he needs to make.
Yeah, and he was very complex in that way, I think, in the fact that he knew he had these problems, but in many ways he saw them as assets. And I think ultimately Surf is like it's a sad song, but it's also got this hopeful undercurrent that was unfortunately extinguished by his death. But again, had he lived, it would have been a song of triumph. Like, I can take a long view of my life and my habits and what I need to change, and there is hope for me, and I just kind of have to accept it and walk towards it. And that would be a very triumphant sentiment for the song. Unfortunately, I think he did want that, and he did think that was possible for him, and it just, life got in the way. And you ended up doing the lyrics that I had written down, specifically highlighted for this song. But if you want to know, I think the fact that Mac Miller kind of saw the writing on the wall for himself. So this idea that we've been going back and forth about, like, what could have changed. I look at this lyric and I go, maybe there was only one way this was ever going to end. And that's not me being like addict, douchebag. It's not that kind of thing. But I think some people know themselves well enough to know what their trajectory looks like. There's a line he has in the song Brand Name where he says, "To everyone who sells me drugs, don't mix it with that bullshit. I'm hoping not to join the 27 club.
Mm-hmm.
And he died of a fentanyl overdose before he turned 27.
Yeah.
I mean, shit like that is just incredibly spooky. I realize, like, how much of it can you chalk up to coincidence and how much of it can you chalk up to a prophecy more dire than when the prophet Cassandra saw her own murder? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's like you say, there was only, unless he made changes, there was really only one way this was going to go. It's kind of like Russian roulette. With, and you hear about where we're from. I mean, heroin and prescription pill addictions are through the roof and have been for decades, and it's just, it's not a good situation, but that those sort of things can really take hold of people. I mean, anytime that I've had, when I got my wisdom teeth out and I got the really weak Vicodins that they had, I was like, I felt great when I was on those, and it's just like, I can see exactly why people get addicted to these things. And, I never had them for like a major surgery or anything like that. So I never got any of the really powerful, strong ones like the Oxycontins or like the 30 milligram Percocets. But it's like the people that I've heard of that got those, they never stopped doing them, or at least didn't for a long time. Like as soon as they were done with the prescription that they had, they found a way to get more. Either, getting prescribed it because doctors don't tend to care that much. They're like, just get out of my office, take what you need. As long as you put on a good face, they're not going to question it. That certainly contributed to the problem. Like just the advertising of like, oh, this will make you feel better. Basically, it's like, it's very easy to fall into that. And it's very difficult to come out of it. You become so chemically dependent on it. And it's like, you can look at somebody like Mac Miller and he can know till the day is done that it's bad for him to do that. Heroin, Oxycontin, like painkillers, like any of those opiates are not a good thing for him to be doing. But when you're so hopelessly addicted to it, and the alternative is your sadness and your despair about why your life isn't where you thought it was going to be, like what choice are you going to make? I mean, it's an easy choice. Your body's telling you to go one way. Your mind is telling you to go one way. The only thing that's probably telling you to go somewhere else is your heart. And people don't tend to listen to that.
It's not stronger than your brain and your urges.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, man, in college, and I'll protect names to protect the innocent here, but although not really innocent, my 21st birthday, a guy palmed me a bunch of 30 mil Percocet.
Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday, have fun. I took one, and I had such a good time that I flushed the rest.
Yeah.
And that was at a time in my life when I was into that kind of thing. Like should have been no I wasn't like, oh, these are dangerous, blah, like axiomatically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If people wanted to bring you a fun drug to try, it was college, and it felt a little consequence free.
Yeah.
But it was so good. I felt so good on 30 milligrams of Percocet. But there was this voice in the back of my head that was like, nope, you like it too much.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep these around, you'll do all of these. And if you do all of these, you will not stop there. Get fucking rid of these. And it was, I was lucky to not be far gone at that point to be like, we had our fun. I'm going to get rid of these.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful that whatever kicked into my brain that day kicked in, because the alternative is a dark place to be. And it's unfortunately what took Mac Miller.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, and again, when you're that famous too, like you could have all day long, all the people that really love you and care about you can hold you back from getting that stuff. They can like keep people away from you, but the second you get away from it, like he's famous. All he has to do, he's probably got a zillion people that are just yes men, that
Mm-hmm.
he's like, hey, I'm looking to score. And all he's got to do is say that and they'll run it right over to him. He can have till the, people surrounding him 23 hours a day. In that 24th hour, he's going to go find it. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, it's, there's no way to stop it if the person themselves isn't willing to get some help with it. And, I don't know how deep he was into doing that. I don't know amounts he was doing or really how often he was doing it, but you take that risk when you do those sort of drugs. It's not like weed where it's like really, probably the worst you're going to end up is with some anxiety and some munchies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, there's not a whole lot of trouble you're going to get in sitting on a couch eating potato chips, drinking can cause an issue, but it's like those, that's a cocaine, heroin, meth, that's a different level. That's a
Yeah.
different level. And those are drugs that grab onto you and they do not let go. They're chemically made to make you addicted to them. And so it's just like, how in that situation do you ever hope? Like, there was no hope for him after a certain point.
Yep.
And it's just hard to think of that. It's just hard.
It is. And at the risk of like chalking his entire personality and his entire career and being up to drugs and drug addiction, I think those were more of a symptom of the underlying problem. And I wrote this down as kind of my thesis for the album, which is it serves not only as a celebration of his music and his life, but in many ways a cautionary tale. Less about drugs and more specifically about the idea that when things are bad, or if you are mentally ill, you want an escape, you're looking for the light, you're looking for a way out, you want a solution, you want to get better, you don't like feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
But you also know that that solution is going to come from you. And that's what scares the shit out of you, and that's what makes you run. You can't trust yourself, so you won't allow yourself to get better. It's deep-seated psychological stuff. So to kind of give the TLDR version of this entire conversation, I guess it would be, not to be a Scoob, but if you are struggling with mental health or addiction, get the help. It's worth it. You're worth it. And I think we want you to do it, and Mac Miller would want you to do it.
Yeah, no matter what bridges you think you've burned or how alone you think you are, reach out to somebody. There are people that probably, I can almost guarantee you, there's somebody that loves you enough to not want to see you end up in the same place. So reach out for the help. Help yourself as well. Look up the sources. Like, you can, if you need somebody to talk to, like, email one of us. We'll be happy to look at that. It's not, we don't want somebody that brings such light to the world like Mac Miller did. We don't want more people to end up like that. And while this album is great, I wish we didn't listen to it in this context, because I think he had a whole lot to offer the world that he didn't get to bring to us. And think of the decades after this that he would have had to be able to bring new music and try new frontiers, and just, we didn't get to see it. And it's a little heartbreaking.
Yep, it's too bad. So again, if you need help, reach out. And in the meantime, stream the album. Maybe there's some comfort in there. Maybe there's some insight in there. But I would say this is worth listening to. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna give this one the stream it stamp. I think if only just for the fact that it's one of the bigger artists of the last probably decade. If only for the fact that it's his last album, but I think it's a very good one. And like you said, it is a cautionary tale, but it's also an enjoyable listen. It's well produced. A lot of things that you could pull from this one. I think a lot of walks of life could relate to this one. Yep, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't promise that next week we won't do someone who died of a drug overdose or killed themselves or something, but hopefully not. Yeah. I don't want to get locked into this, so...
Yeah, it'd be nice to, do a little happier one after this for sure. I think it's, I like what we're doing with getting, more a lesser known, album or artist, get a little bit of shine, because that opens our eyes to it as well. It's not just about, giving publicity to something we think sounds cool. It's like, it also works for us as well to branch out a little bit. But it's, so hopefully we find something new to bring to you guys for next week. And hopefully we'll find something a little happier to listen to for the main album.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you have anything else this week?
No, that's it for me. Take us home, Country Road.
All right. Well, folks, we'll look out for those videos. Go on YouTube, subscribe to that channel, get ready to see those. We're kind of figuring out the schedule on that now. So when we have that a little more nailed down, we'll make sure we let you know. But we do have some things that I think are just about ready to go. They just got to be put in the chamber and we got to pull the trigger. But look for those videos, subscribe on there, follow us on all our other channels, Instagram, find us Out on That Line. Twitter, you find us at Out on That Line 1. Email us, like I mentioned before, outonthatline@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page, if that's the way you get your news. We post on that with the new episodes every week. So please follow us there if you do have Facebook. And yeah, I think that's it, folks. So until next time.